Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Kansas City Royals. Thanks so much for watching. Apologies that it's been a few days since we posted anything. Try to get back on a little bit more of a regular schedule here. But we are at the midway point of the 2029 season, and it's been a middling season for the Royals. Perfectly acceptable. 46 and 38. We're half a game out in the Central Division. We would be a wild card team if the season ended today. So it's been a acceptable season by any measure, in my view. And we've actually underperformed expectations. We have the third most runs scored in the AL, and we have the third fewest runs allowed in the AL. So we've actually underperformed expectations by 5 games and have the best run differential in all of the American leagues. So the hope is that the second half of the season will be even better than the first half, and we'll be able to get back on top in the AL Central. The big hurdles to us getting there are 2 major injuries that we've suffered over the first half of the season, namely Luis Jose, who was a big trade that we made last offseason. 2-time Gold Glove winning outfielder, even though he's only 26 years old. Picked him up for the Red Sox, had to send a big package to them, was expecting him to be excellent defensively again and at least acceptable offensively. And he certainly was. He was much better than advertised when he was with us, putting up a 137 OPS plus. But you can see he suffered a fractured ankle almost 2 months ago at the beginning of May, and he's going to be out for another 5 weeks. So he was fragile when we picked him up. His durability was the one concern we had about him, and it obviously reared its ugly head, so to speak, in his first year with the team. But hopefully we will have him back by early August, and he'll be able to give us a couple of good months, and hopefully we'll make it into the postseason. But we've lost him, who is arguably our second most important position player behind Bobby Witt Jr., and then we also lost arguably our second most important pitcher, Trevor Rogers, who is out for surgery to remove a bone spur. And we have an $18 million team option on him next year. So he has likely pitched his last game for us. He won the Cy Young Award in 2026. He missed all of 2027 with an injury when the Royals won the World Series. Came back last year and pitched well, and was not pitching as well this year before he got hurt, but he was already fragile before this injury. He's going to be 32 years old next season. I have a hard time believing that we'll be bringing him back after a second major injury in the past 3 seasons. Basically ends another year for him. So behind Spencer Bauer, he's arguably was the second most important pitcher on our pitching staff. So losing both of those players over the first half of the season has certainly been a big negative for the Royals. But as I said, we're right in the mix of it right now. Going to focus in this episode, and I'm not sure how long this episode will be. As I said, I just want to get something out for people to react to, and appreciate your kind of patience waiting for me to get this out there. Normally in July, I kind of go through the draft, go through the international amateur free agents, and then spend a lot of time on the trade deadline and kind of preparing for that. We'll definitely get through the international amateur free agents and the draft in this episode, but depending on how deep I decide I want to go into figuring out what, if any, trades we want to make with this team, may save some of that for the next episode. So it may just be about a month of the season that we cover here. The Royals, as we talked about in our last episode, do about $6 million, so we have potential to take on some contracts as we get closer to the trade deadline if there's a way to improve our team. The issue and the concern is just that right now there's not really anyone all that exciting on the trade block. Now, clearly, we could try to trade for someone who's not on the trade block. But you look at all the players out there, and only one player, closer Andres Munoz of the Phillies, is considered above a 3-star player. And he would obviously be a nice addition to the team. 3 really good pitches, excellent stuff, acceptable movement, okay control, throws 100 miles an hour. And he's been okay this year with a 4.08 ERA, 67 strikeouts over 46 and a third innings pitched. So he's been fine, but he's making $16 million this year, $16 million next year. Certainly could help our bullpen, but we'll have to see what the cost of him is as we get closer to potentially needing to make some decisions about who we might be bringing on in trades here as this 2029 season moves into the second half of the year. And as we've headed to July 1st, Royals haven't been doing anything more exceptional. We're now 2 games out in the division. Made it to the international amateur free agent period. You can see certainly, at least according to the star ratings, a few people stand out. Alfredo Sanchez, center fielder, looks like he could be a plus hitter. Also respectable defensively for a center fielder. Certainly would be a very good left fielder and an acceptable defensive center fielder, and given his range and his error rating, he'd be a acceptable right fielder, but really wouldn't want to play him there with that poor arm. Decent personality. It also looks like he's got some skill to play in the infield. Yeah, pretty good range and error, just not much of an arm, but he could be a pretty good second baseman with 70 range, 60 at turning the double play, 55 error. So a very versatile defensive player who also looks like he could have a plus bat, and he's only 17 years old in one day. So he could be a very interesting prospect from the cradle of shortstops in the Dominican. Alex Flores, third baseman, another good-looking potential bat. Decent personality, not much of a defensive player. You could put him at third because of the arm, but the range and the error are not great. Could put him in left field or right field if you needed to. He's 6'1". You could play him at first base. So has versatility to eventually play some of the less valuable defensive positions. But that bat, if it fully develops, almost maxed out contact, gap power, and home run power, would certainly be interesting. And then Bong Soo Lee, another decent looking bat, good personality, looks like a corner outfielder. Could play him at you really wouldn't want to play him anywhere in the infield. You could play him at first, but doesn't really have the range and error or turning double play ability for a second baseman, and doesn't really have the arm to play third, even though his range is acceptable. The fact that he throws left-handed probably is the reason why he's not good at turning double plays in general. So he's an interesting prospect. Maurice Swan doesn't look like he's quite as good a hitter as the other two, and clearly has no defensive position to play. Those are kind of the top prospects, at least according to our scout Travis Lee, looking at what the OOTP Scouting Association says. Looks like there's a couple players they rank a little higher. Jose Arujo looks like a decent prospect according to them. Our scout a lot less enthusiastic. I don't know. I'm just inclined to go for the best player out there initially. Alfredo Sanchez. I don't know if he really is the best player out there. He's just the first one I looked at. Definitely could have a plus bat if he develops completely, and I do like that he has a lot of position versatility defensively. Could be a pretty interesting player. Starting pitcher Edwin Contreras, best case scenario, looks like an average major league starter, so he's not all that exciting. Bobby Cintron, actually kind of similar to the other center fielder we were looking at, that he could play. He could play a lot of defensive positions acceptably. He might be a decent fallback if we don't get Sanchez. But we are going to go ahead and not spend too much time thinking about this and offer Mr. Sanchez the full $5 million. See if we can bring on the one player that our scout thinks is a 5-star potential player among all of the international amateur free agents here in 2029. And unfortunately, Sanchez prefers the offer of our cross-state rivals, the St. Louis Cardinals. So we won't be signing Sanchez. Still just about anybody we looked at available. So we're going to give it a little thought. Won't make you listen to all of my thoughts back and forth, but I'm going to go revisit all of the players that I looked at and circle back in seconds for you, even if it takes me hours, with what I'm going to do with my next offer. And I think we're going to go with the guy who we said just a few minutes ago might be our backup plan if things didn't work out with Sanchez, and that's Bobby Cintron, 17-year-old from Venezuela. Could have plus contact, plus gap power, and be a bit above average as a home run hitter. Not going to walk very much, although he won't strike out very much. But do just like the defensive versatility he potentially has. Could, credibly probably play any position except shortstop and catcher. So that, he's not going to be great at most of those positions. In fact, I don't know if I'd call him great defensively at any position with that profile. I guess he might be a great left fielder just compared to most of the players that you'd see playing left field. But the other thing I like about him is that we've got high scouting accuracy with him right now. Some of the other players, Bong Su Lee, for instance, we only have average scouting accuracy at this point with that other center fielder. We could obviously take time to try to scout these guys up a little bit, but they will likely be off the market by that point. So don't have time to wait, quite honestly. So we're going to see if we can make an offer to Bobby Cintron. Looking for $5 million, said he really likes us and would love to come play for us. So we will meet his demand, submit the offer, and we will see what happens with Mr. Cintron. And a very busy couple of days for the Royals. Alfredo Sanchez did sign with somebody else, but it wasn't the Cardinals, as he had indicated. He ended up signing with the Red Sox. Peyton Williams, designated hitter, out with a torn thigh muscle for 4 months. So I guess if we make a long playoff run, there's a chance we may have him back in the playoffs, but that's obviously another big loss for the team that we'll need to figure out. Bobby Cintron did sign the contract, so he wasn't bluffing when he said he appreciated the offer and was really excited about our organization, so happy to have him in the international complex. But right now, the key thing we're going to have to do is figure out how to replace Mr. Peyton Williams, whose regular season for us is certainly done at this point. You can see he was batting third for us against righties and batting fifth against lefties. So obviously going to miss that bat in the middle of our lineup. Only hit 241 this year, which is kind of what he is at this point, a 230, 240, 250 kind of hitter. But 18 homers and 295 at-bats, 800 OPS, good for a 119 OPS plus and a 117 WRC plus. So will definitely be a loss to have Mr. Williams out of the middle of our lineup. But the only positive thing is we'll probably be missing a bat with him gone, but given that he really only can DH for us or play a pretty mediocre first base or left field, our defense should be a little better with almost anyone that we could possibly bring up to replace him. I'm talking my book here. I'm trying to make a negative into a positive, so we'll give some thought to who we need to bring up from AAA to replace Mr. Williams. And there is a definite temptation to bring up Alex Vasquez, the top prospect in our system, who we're actually training to play a little bit of first base now. You can see he's similar to Williams in one way in that he really is a very mediocre defensive player. His batting ratings right now kind of indicate he's ready for the majors. It really looks that way. But he's been brutal since we brought him up to AAA, hitting just a .185 and 119 at-bats with just one home run. He's only 22 years old. As I mentioned, he's the top prospect in our system, the number 6 prospect in baseball. The ratings say that he's ready for the majors, but his performance in AAA says that he isn't. So I am not going to bring him up yet, even though even the little green arrow says he's ready for the majors. But he's just done so poorly in AAA. Want to give him a little more seasoning down there. And I think the guy we're going to go with is Juan Pablo Correa, who we picked up in a trade with the Mets last Halloween. Has had a pretty productive season in AAA, 249 batting average, but 18 homers and 277 at-bats. His AAA numbers are actually pretty similar to the numbers of Peyton Williams, who he's going to be replacing. Now, certainly don't expect him to hit at the same level in the majors that he has been at AAA, but he does have plus home run power. Can play first, third, or corner outfield for us. My hunch is he kind of becomes a utility type player for us. We want to make sure that we're not force starting him in left field at the major league level. So we will, and part of the reason we're bringing him up is this is the last option year for Correa. So we kind of want to have a better sense of what he is or isn't before we have to make a big decision on him next year, because obviously he'll have to clear waivers next season if we want to put him down in AAA. So we'd like to have a better sense of what he is or isn't at that point. So with him on the roster, let's see what Nichols thinks of these lineups. You can see Correa, Barrero, and Reese McGuire are the only players who don't start anywhere. Sal Frelick moves to DH. That puts Stephen Paulini into the lineup. And then against lefties, Zach DeCenzo goes in and becomes our designated hitter. So a little PT for Mr. DeCenzo, along with a little bit of extra playing time for Mr. Paulini, given that we have the injury for basically the rest of the regular season to Peyton Williams. And the Royals are really kind of struggling. You can see 3-7 in our last 10. We're now third in the AL Central, 3.5 behind Chicago, a game behind Detroit. And if the season were to end today, we're a game and a half out of the wild card. So going to definitely need to turn things around. I'm going to definitely keep an eye on the trade block as we get closer to the end of July. It's becoming a very interesting and challenging season for these Royals. One good piece of news, Zach Jacobs is back from his injury, or potentially back. I think we're going to just figure out a way to move him right onto the Major League roster. He hasn't been out that long, so I don't think we need to send him on a rehab assignment. That likely means that Bryce Hubbart's going to be headed back down, which is kind of crazy with his 1.85 ERA. But we just have such good pitching that we got such a good pitching staff. You know, we could send down, I guess, one of the guys who's been starting for us. But Hubbart back down to Omaha, no fault of his own. He's pitched really well for us, but we'll put Jacobs back on the Major League roster, see what Mr. Nichols wants the staff to look like, and Jacobs slots right into the number 5 hole in our starting rotation. Looking at this pitching staff, Caleb Lagerwell has been brilliant, 10-2 with a 2.87 ERA. But our de facto ace, Spencer Bauer, 2027 AL Cy Young Award winner, is 8-7, but has put up a 5.13 ERA this season. So not the best year out of Mr. Bauer at this point. In thinking about big performances, I saw where the All-Star rosters just hit. So let's see how many Royals we have. Lagerwell, who we just mentioned, is going to be an All-Star. And that is actually his first All-Star appearance for the, I guess, veteran at this point with the Royals, who we traded for from the Marlins a few years ago after we had traded him to the Marlins for Trevor Rogers a few years before that. In kind of a really crazy year for the Royals. You may remember that in some of the recent years, we've had 4, 5, 6 pitchers on the All-Star team, given our excellent bullpen. And our bullpen is still doing really well this year, but the only All-Star among the pitchers is Caleb Lagerwell. Looking at the position players, really a down year for the Royals. Wow. That we have no position players, so we have only one All-Star this year, Caleb Lagerwell, who definitely deserves that recognition. 10-2, 2.87 ERA, 3.0 WAR as a pitcher, but pretty surprising that that is all we have on the All-Star team. Last time we looked in, we had some pretty solid seasons. Bobby Witt Jr. was doing pretty well for us. You can see he's still put up a 3 WAR on the season. Hasn't been a great year, but hitting 275, 10 homers, 53 ribbies, 23 steals, 115 OPS plus. Would have thought that would be close to good enough for a third baseman to get in. Sal Frelick, 29 stolen bases. Shi-Tong Kin, 16 homers and 67 ribbies, while batting 271 for a first baseman. So definitely some players who I would have thought would get some consideration, but hopefully this will motivate the Royals to play even better in the second half of the season. And we're now at the amateur draft, where after a great regular season last year, the Royals will be picking 33rd in the first round. So that's obviously not optimal, but it is what it is. I would not expect any of the top 10 prospects to slide to us, but we'll see what the Royals can put together here in this 2029 Major League Amateur Draft. And we've made it to our 33rd pick. You can see one big-time player, at least according to our scout, left. Unfortunately, he's a relief pitcher, so I think it's pretty unlikely that we will take him first. Actually, we're looking only at all pitchers rather than all players. So there is a first baseman that our scout is pretty impressed with, Alex Cervantes, who's available. Definitely looks like he could have a really nice bat. He's pretty miserable defensive player. Can't even play the outfield. He is a DH. It'll be interesting to see. He's definitely got a potentially really good bat. But we've been talking about Peyton Williams, who's on the IL now, and this is a player who may be even worse defensively than Peyton Williams. Not a lot of speed, can't play any position defensively, but he is just a pure bat. He is durable. So given that he's a designated hitter, you would think that he's never going to miss a game because he's never going to be playing in the field. But who does Travis Lee recommend that we take? And he recommends we take Cervantes. As I mentioned, the potential is that bat is... I don't want to say special. I think that would be overstating it a bit, but it could be a very good major league bat, which with the 33rd pick in the draft, you'd be pretty happy to take. Looks like his bonus demand is also pretty reasonable. So he is certainly in the mix, but before I make that decision, obviously going to scout a little more deeply some of these other players that are available. Troy Ector, the 21-year-old college closer, clearly looks like he can be an excellent relief pitcher, an extreme ground ball pitcher who's already throwing 100 miles an hour. Really could be extremely effective. If he's still available in the second round, would certainly think about it. I don't see us taking him in the first round. Manny Cardenas is kind of the highest rated starter out there. Is potentially going to be a 3-pitch pitcher, although his fastball is just, even in a best case scenario, going to be barely above average. Stuff, movement, and control, all kind of major league average or a little bit better. He is only 18 years old, lefty, so there's certainly room for him to develop and start throwing harder than 92 to 94 miles an hour. But all things considered, I don't view him as a premium prospect. Omar Heel here is a left fielder. Looks like he could definitely have a plus bat. He's certainly a better defensive outfielder than Cervantes, but I don't think his bat is quite as good as Cervantes. Love the fact that he could have excellent contact and plus gap power, and more importantly, plus home run power. When you look at Heel, he's got the home run power and the gap power, but definitely not as good a contact hitter. But I like his personality. He's a little bit better on the base paths, and he can at least play a couple positions defensively. Also a pretty reasonable demand. Right now I'm leaning towards either Heel or Cervantes, but still going to do a little more scouting before I decide one way or the other. And I've made a bit of a decision. We're not going to go with Cervantes. I think the bat could be really good, but he's just got no speed. He can't play anywhere defensively. He's just a pure DH, and if the bat doesn't develop, which I think it probably would, he's basically worthless. So that means that I'm down to Omar Heel, the left fielder who I mentioned, potentially a little bit better home run power, a little bit better eye, not as good as contact, not as good as avoiding strikeouts, but at least you could put him in left field or right field. You wouldn't necessarily feel great about it defensively, but he would be functional as a corner outfielder. John Lara, first baseman, not great defensively, like the personality with the high work ethic and intelligence. He profiles as an above average offensive player, durable, but not all that great defensively, and can't really even play a corner outfield spot. And then the last option was Josiah Simpson, a college center fielder. Like the range and error, the arm is acceptable for a center fielder, but looks like he could be a very good defensive center fielder. And looks like if everything develops, he could be a bit above average as a major league hitter. The issue is he's almost 22 years old. Is he going to reach all of that potential at this point? He's been a pretty productive college player, 10 triples each of his 3 years. You can see that really good gap power with all the doubles and triples, and he does have a little bit of speed, even though he's not that great a base runner. Interesting decision among those three for me. And I don't love my decision, but I'm going to go with the center fielder, the college player, Josiah Simpson. We just invested in a center fielder who's hopefully going to be with us for several years, but we know that he's fragile already, and I think Simpson's probably a few years away. But if he's going to be more than acceptable defensively, he would be a plus center fielder with that 70 range and 70 error rating, even though his arm is not that great. So he would be an asset as a defensive center fielder. And if he fully develops, he's a plus offensive player even if he doesn't fully develop, he's probably an average-ish offensive player, which with a really good glove is still a pretty valuable player for us. So I'm going to go with the player who, although doesn't offer as good a bat as Cervantes, Heel, or Lara potentially, is by far the best defensive player among those three. So we are going to disagree with what scouting director Travis Lee suggests, and we are going to go with Josiah Simpson as our first round draft choice in 2029. Auto drafting to our next pick. And this is a little crazy. Cervantes is still out there and Lara is still out there. Whew. I guess I'm glad I didn't go for either of them. They're really both bat first players, but here in the end of the second round, having those two guys available, Lara supposedly is going to be impossible to sign, but the demand from Cervantes is reasonable. I know I just said moments ago that when we moved on from him, the lack of defensive versatility was the reason we weren't going to take him. But to be able to pick him up with the last pick of the second round of the draft for that bat potentially, honestly, that's kind of how we got Peyton Williams a few years ago. He just kept dropping to the fourth round, and even though we didn't love him defensively, we just felt that he was by far such a good bat that we had to take him. And I think Cervantes could be an even better bat than Peyton Williams. So not surprisingly, our scout still recommends that we take him 32 picks after we last passed on him. And we are going to follow the scout's recommendations this time and pick up the potential big hitter Cervantes with our second pick in the 2029 draft. We've made it to the third round. Travis Lee suggests we take the high school shortstop Victor Almanza. Definitely an interesting player. Looks like he could become a plus offensive player. The issue is he's definitely not a shortstop at the major league level. He's 6'2", so could potentially play him at first. You could play him at second or third if you had to. Doesn't really have the arm for third. Doesn't really have the range for second. He'd be a credible outfielder, though. Certainly could play left, and you could put him in right or center if you needed to. So he is a interesting prospect. John Lara, who we mentioned, another really solid batting prospect with a great personality, is still out there. His signability is viewed as impossible, which is why he's fallen to this third round. We have in the past been able to sign some of these allegedly impossible players by offering them, 9, 10, 11, 12 million dollars, some cases even above what they say they need. So we could take a flyer on him in the third round, and then if we don't sign him, we'll just get a replacement pick next year. The only reason I say we might be able to do that is the first two players, Cervantes with a $1.3 million demand, and Josiah Simpson's demand is well below slot. So we do potentially have the money available to throw a lot more than you normally would at a third round type player. So Lara is potentially in the mix, but we're going to give it a little bit of thought and think about Almanza, think about Lara, and think about the rest of these players out there and see if we may have a big-time player that we can add here in the third round of the draft. And we're not quite ready to pull the trigger on Lara. If he's still around later, we would. Looking at him, he profiles as a 65 and 60s, across the different batting ratings if everything develops, which he definitely has a shot at with a high work ethic, high intelligence, great personality, 18 years old. He's durable. He's got a lot going for him to think that he will reach, most, if not all of that batting potential. but as we've talked about, just not much defensively. And then when I look at Victor Almanza, in a perfect scenario, you can see he can get to 60 to 65 in all of the categories, potentially, except for home run power. So he is not quite as good of an offensive player. Normal injury proneness instead of durable, doesn't have that great work ethic. But he does have the ability to be pretty versatile defensively, and he's also only looking for slot rather than some impossible amount of money to sign. So we are going to pick Almanza right now with this third round pick, meet his demand, auto draft until our next pick. And you can see, we're still here in the third round because last year the player we drafted in the third round was almost impossible to sign. So that's why we've got the extra third rounder this year. So Travis Lee recommends we take Harry Burgess, a high school outfielder. Can see, it looks like he could be if he develops fully, he would be an above average major league hitter, but, barely average power, really good contact, really good at avoiding strikeouts. Not going to walk a ton, has a little bit of gap power, but not great speed and not great defensively. I think we're actually going to take Lara at this point. He almost certainly develops into a plus major league bat if we can sign him. Now that signability is allegedly impossible, but we have 3 players that we've taken in the first 3 rounds of this draft who are not looking for much money at all. We could going to potentially get them all signed for about $2.5 million with our first 3 picks. So that does give us the opportunity to throw a wacky amount of money at our second, third round pick and see if we can get the impossible player signed in our second, third round selection. And even if we can't get him signed, we'll just get another compensatory pick next year, given that he is a third rounder. So we are going to go ahead and take Lara right now with a third round pick. And that's another interesting decision that we've made in the draft. We'll see whether it pays off or not. And here in the fourth round, kind of starting to search more just based on players' potential. Robbie Manzo looks like a real interesting batting prospect in right field. He's also allegedly impossible to sign. Don't think we're going to go for him right now, but could be a decent fallback. Harry Burgess, who we talked about last round, is still available. He is definitely in the mix as someone to pick. Daniel Smith is a starting pitcher prospect who definitely does not offer much in terms of being a major league starting pitcher, but the batting profile is interesting. Could have plus contact, plus gap power, plus avoiding Ks in acceptable power. Not the greatest eye. He's not going to walk a ton. And he absolutely has no position to play defensively. But he could be a bat. And then there's also another player with a similar profile, another pitcher, Jesus Ramirez, who looks a little more legitimate in terms of his ability as a pitching prospect. But also looks like he could be a average-ish to above average major league bat, and he could at least play a credible left field or right field for you in a pinch. So a few interesting prospects out there. Interestingly, after our scout recommended we take Harry Burgess in the third round, he's not recommending that we take him in the fourth round, and instead suggesting we take the left fielder Nate Fleming, who doesn't really interest me at all in terms of his batting profile. So we're going to go ahead and actually take Burgess, but we're going to keep an eye on Manzo, who's just impossible to sign allegedly, as well as Ramirez and Daniel Smith as pitchers who may be better off as bats in the coming rounds as players to potentially pick up here as we get further into the draft. But right now we are going to go with Burgess here in the 4th round. Moving on, you can see that both Daniel Smith and Jesus Ramirez are still around as potential pitchers that we could try to turn into hitters. Scouting director recommends we take Jerry Aguiar, right fielder, high school player. Not all that exciting of a batting profile in my view. Looking at a few pitchers just in terms of pitching potential, Darren Boston, starting pitching prospect, is probably the most versatile pitcher out there at this point. 18-year-old high schooler. If all 3 of his pitches develop, he's obviously got the 3 pitches kind of required to be an effective starter. He definitely has the stamina. Is a 5th round prospect. I think he's not a horrible guy to think about bringing on board. Signability is going to be extremely hard, so he's obviously looking for a little bit more money, but you can see just in terms of potential, of the players that are still out there, he really kind of stands out. So we are going to take a lottery ticket pick on the starter Darren Boston with our 5th round draft choice. And scouting director, back to Danny Navarro. Love his work ethic. Got good stamina. Potentially has 3 acceptable pitches. Not great movement and potentially not even great control. Don't know that I love him. Ramon Perez, the reliever, certainly looks like he can have really good stuff. Good work ethic, so he should develop, and don't mind here in the 6th round potentially taking a reliever. But before we go back down that route, just going to go back and look at batting potential and see if either of those young pitchers is out there. And Daniel Smith still is. Again, he's not going to make it as a pitcher, but you look at those batting ratings, plus contact, plus gap power, plus home run power, plus avoiding strikeouts, if everything develops, which is by no means certain. He is a pure DH if I've ever seen one. He can't play anywhere defensively, but that bat for the 6th round, I'm willing to take a flyer on turning him into a designated hitter rather than a starting pitcher. So we're going to go ahead and pick Daniel Smith here in the 6th round. And Daniel Smith, the pitcher that we want to turn into a hitter, is kind of the last interesting decision we had to make in the draft. So I'm not going to bore you with all of those details. You can see here high demands from some of the later players that we picked. Darren Boston, the starting pitching prospect we got in the 5th round, is also looking for a fair amount of money. But I think that we potentially can make some type of offer to Lara, who's allegedly impossible to sign. But we're going to try to get everybody else signed first and then just see how much money we have left before trying to get John Lara signed with that 3rd round pick. We've now signed all but 2 of our draftees, still waiting to hear about the 5th round pitcher Darren Boston. But we can make an offer to Lara. The slot is only $830,000. Clearly he's demanding an insane amount of money. He intends to go to college unless we meet his demand. This is probably our last chance to sign him. Supposedly he needs a bonus significantly above $9 million to consider signing. We've only got a budget of about $3.3 million left for signing bonuses and contracts. So I think it's pretty unlikely that we're going to be able to sign him. I had kind of forgotten that I guess I hadn't really forgotten anything, except I forgot how to talk for the last 10 seconds here. I don't think we're going to have enough money to get it done with him. But again, we'll just get another third round pick for him next year, and maybe eventually we'll hit one of these people. I guess I was thinking, financially, right now we're on pace to have a pretty profitable season, which is good. But the team itself is still struggling a bit at this point. You can see we're 3 games behind in the Central, still in third place, and we're 1 game out of the wild card if the season ended today. So even though I could potentially offer a little more than that, I do want to keep some money available for free agents. I don't want to spend it all on I don't want to spend it all on these rookies. So we may revisit things with Lara after we get through the trade deadline. But we may need to do something at the trade deadline too. So I'm not going to make him an offer right now. If we don't end up taking on a lot of contracts at the trade deadline, we could potentially throw him a lowball offer and see what happens. I think it's pretty unlikely that we'll get him signed for a lowball offer, and he'll probably go to college, and we'll just get another third round pick to replace him next year. But I don't want to totally get rid of the flexibility we have to bring on a free agent here as we get closer to the trade deadline. So that's going to be our big focus, because we are still ultimately in win now mode, and I think we are a team that can do some damage this year if we can make it into the playoffs. Taking a look at the trade block and what's available right now, definitely a lot more interesting players out there. Now, granted, a lot of them are relievers who aren't going to necessarily make a huge impact, but even Aaron Nola is out there as a starter, 36 years old. He's in the final year of a contract. So there are definitely some options for us to think about here over the next couple of days. It's July 25th right now, so we've got 6 days left in the month to kind of make a decision on whether or not we want to bring on somebody to help us. The other thing to think about is that it looks like Luis Jose is recovering, pretty soon, about 3 days left with that fractured ankle, and then we'll have to send him down to AAA, to shake off the rust and hopefully get back into shape for a few days. But he should be back soon, which will essentially be like a trade deadline acquisition almost, because it will allow us to get Jason Dominguez and his ugly 182 batting average out of our starting lineup. So that will be a step in the right direction when we get Jose back in a few days, but still may look to add some additional help through trade with one of our competitors, because we want to make sure that we're back in the playoffs this year. This is a team in win now mode. We've only got Bobby Witt Jr. signed for another couple seasons at a pretty reasonable level, and then his number balloons to a huge player option in his final year, which is either going to be a big salary for us to have to pay, or it's going to mean that he's a free agent and likely leaving us. So we want to remain as competitive as possible, get back to the playoffs, hopefully for a 5th straight year, and hopefully do some damage in the playoffs. So we are going to give some thought and some time into what we're going to do ahead of the trade deadline in our next episode. Overall, it's been kind of a mediocre July for us so far, quite honestly. Looking at the team statistics, we are the definition of mediocre, 8-8 in July after we played a little bit better in June. We've been .500 over this past month. You can see we've slipped down to 8th in runs scored, although we're only 2nd in runs allowed. So that tells me that although I'm always willing to add pitching, adding some help for our offense may be the way to go as we approach the trade deadline. So we will put some thought into that in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.